So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to build the login page, and I'm going to use pretty much all the tactics that I used in the previous video for the register page. So there's going to be a lot of copying and pasting, but the code will be in the description, and I also will you will be able to copy it from there or pause the video and copy it, either way. So first I'm going to go ahead and generate the login page, and remember you need to navigate into the folder that has the components. So inside of client, src, app, and then components. And so I'm going to generate a new one for the login page. I'm going to do that with ng generate component and then name it login. Okay, then once that's done, I'll go ahead and go into there. Now in the HTML, I'm going to paste in a form, a login form that's going to utilize a lot of the same concepts that I use in the register, actually every concept. I'll just zoom in here a little bit. Now I'll just walk you through really quick what I did here. So here I have just an error or success message, just like the one I created in the register page. So I'll have to create this inside the component. And then I have my login form with two inputs, username, password. And then I have validation also added to this as well, just like I did in the register page. And then here I'm disabling the form if either one, it's not valid, two, it's in processing. So now I'm just going to go in the component now and then create this form group, and along with the other variables that I injected, as well as this login submit function that I have for the submit event. Okay, so I will need to import the form builder. Validators and form control. And then here in the constructor, same as before, calling that form builder. And then up here, I'm just going to create these, and that's going to be the message class, message, as well as the processing, and then the actual form itself. Okay, then I will create the function to create the form. Just name it create form. And then, so like I said, a lot of this just is a repeat of what we did in register. So I'm not going to sit here and explain it again. You can watch that video if need be, but I will just run it through really fast. And then inside the constructor, I will ensure this form is created when the component is loaded. And then I'll have my two methods, or my two functions for disabling the form, as well as enabling it. And then, so going back to HTML, the submit event, this is the function that I specified. So I'll go ahead and create that as well. So first I'll set the processing variable to true, and then also disable the form. And then I'm going to also create the user object from the user's input. Okay, and that's pretty much it for right now as far as the front end is concerned. So now what I'll do is go ahead and start building on the back. So I'm just going to close all of this out, and then I can go inside my routes and start off with the authentication file. And then so I'm just going to create a new route for authentication. So this is going to be a post request. You always want to use post for logging in, and then I'll just name it login. And then I'm just going to test it really quick and make sure that everything's working with my postman. So you want to have postman open and then pass in authentication. And then log in. Now, just as a reminder, if you go back over to the index file, we specified we wanted authentication to be used with all routes coming from authentication file. Right, and then followed by login. And so that's why here in Postman we have authentication / login. So I'm just going to hit send on that. Make sure you have post up here, and then you should get that test back. So we can go ahead and continue with this. So we want to run a check and make sure that we have the username and the password. So we'll say if request.body.username is not true, then turn false message. No username was provided. Same thing, this time for the password. Okay, so I'm just going to test this at this point. Right, and you should get that first error of the no username. So you want to make sure that for your headers you have content type x www form URL encoded. And then for your body you want to make sure that option is also selected. Now this should all be set by default in post, but just in case. And then for key I'm going to pass in the username and just provide my own. Right, and then you should get that no password. Okay, and then we get the test, so we can go ahead and move on. So instead of that, I'm going to go ahead and search for the user in the database. I'm going to search by username, and then I'm going to use the username that was provided, but I'm also going to lowercase it just in case. This is going to be done already in the front end, but I also like to just make sure that I'm doing that on the back end. And I'll either get a error or a user. So if I do get that error, then I just want to respond with that error in the form of a message. And if I don't find a user, then that typically means the username was not found. So I'll say and so if we get to this point, this means that the user was found, but we need to, before we authenticate the user, we need to make sure they got the password correct. So we need to compare their password to the password that's stored in the database. So going into the models folder into our user model, down here where we defined the schema, we created a method to do just that, and it's to compare passwords provided by the user to the ones stored in a database. So we can use this compare password method. And so you do that just by typing user .compare password, and then don't forget we also have to pass in a password to test. Okay, so this is what it will look like. So I'll just save it into a const and I'll name it valid password. And then I'll say I'll take the user object and apply that method, which if you remember was compare password, and then I'll pass in the password that the user provided for us. Then I'll say if the password is not valid, in other words, it doesn't pass the comparison test and returns as false, then we'll return with success false, message, password invalid. Or you can say password does not match, something like that. Else, then we can return with success. As I was filming this, I realized I made an error here. So if you go back to your user model for this compare method, we'll actually have to change this to just be function and get rid of this arrow function here. And so that should work for you. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass in a username that I know works and hit send. And then I get the invalid password. And so I'm going to pass in the password that I know is correct. And then get that success message there. So now we need a method of maintaining the user's login session rather than just sending a message here that says success, right? So what I like to use is Json Web Tokens because they're really easy to implement. So just search Json Web Token npm and then click this first one here. And all we need to do is just install that. And let me go back to the root. And then at the top of my file, I'm just going to go ahead and define that. Along with that, I'm also going to import the database config file, and you'll see why in a minute here. All right. So back on the JSON website, it tells you how to create a token, and that's right here. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. And so what we're going to do is with this token, we're going to encrypt the user's ID and then send that to the browser, and that way we can let the browser know that the user signed in, and we can verify that using their ID along with the secret that we created. Whoops, wrong file. Inside of our database config file, right? So that's what this secret is coming in for. We're going to use that to verify the token that we create. And so this is how you create it, jwt.sign. And then we can assign anything that we want, but just keep in mind that JSON Web Tokens can be decrypted, so you don't want to contain any personal information. It's up to you what you want to include. I like to just assign the ID because that's pretty safe. Okay, and that's coming from the user object up here that we created. Okay, and then following that, after the curly brace here, I'm going to add config.secret. Okay, and that's going to pull in the secret that we created in our database config file, followed by a comma, and then expiration time, and I'm going to say expires in 24 hours, right? That's how long it's going to take for this token to expire. After 24 hours, users can no longer use it, and it will log them out. So now down here in this response, I can actually attach that as well, right? I can just say token. But I also want to send back the user object, so I'm just going to put comma user. But I'm not going to send the entire user. So what I'll do is just specify that I only want to send the username. Okay, and so that sends the user back as as an object, but it will only contain what I specified here, which is the username. And so since I provided the token here, I need to go ahead and create that. So right here, just at the beginning, I'll create a const, name it token, and that will allow me to attach that there. So now I'm going to try to log in again and see what I get back. You'll see now I get everything. I get the user object, and then I get this huge token that we created. So now we could take that from the front end with Angular 2 and save it in the browser for the user. Okay, so now we can go back into the front end, the Angular side, and what I'm gonna do is inside of client source app services, I'm gonna open the authentication service. and we can start creating some functions for the login. The first thing that I want to do is create a function called store user data, and it's going to take in the token and the user object that we created in the API. So remember, we were returning the token and the user, so we're going to store that in the browser with this function. And the way you do that is with local storage.setItem, the name, and then the token itself. And I'm going to do the same thing with the user object as well. However, we also have to stringify this, and the way you do that is with JSON in all caps .stringify, and then pass in the user object. So then at the top here, I'm going to create two more underneath the domain. I'm going to create auth token as well as the user. Then I'm going to assign both of those down here, so it's going to look like this. And then so right above this one, I'm actually going to create the function for actually logging the user in. So I'll say authenticate, let's say login, and it's going to take the user object. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the login component. So first, actually, I need to import the Authentication Service. And then don't forget to pass it here in the constructor as well. So then here I will first call allService.login, and remember, it expects the user object. And if we don't have success, then I will set the message class to bootstrap alert danger. Then set the message, end processing, and then enable the form. Otherwise, I will set the class to bootstraps alert success. And then I will run the other function, which was store user data. And if you don't remember, it's expecting the token and the user, right, which we would have just gotten back from this HTTP request, right? And so just like above, data.message, data.success, it'll be the same. It'll be data.token and data.user. Then I'm going to set a timeout to redirect users after they log in, and I'll do it after 2 seconds. And then I also have to import the router as well. Okay, and then I haven't created this route yet for the login component, so I'm actually going to go back into the app routing module and then just create that one. Then I also have to import the component for login. Right, so then I'm going to go into a couple places here. First, the home HTML. I'm going to change this login button to the link properly now. So we can just add router link equals login. And I'm just going to copy that because I'm going to use it again. I'm going to also use it in the navbar HTML where we have this login. Okay. Now, going back to the browser, I want to show you how this works exactly. So if you click on the login route, if you're using Google Chrome, and I believe Firefox and Internet Explorer has this too, but if you open your developer tools and you click application, and then you go to your local storage, so here you'll see my local storage for the browser. Watch what happens when I log in. And by the way, you also want to test like invalid passwords, invalid usernames, just to make sure you get that error message and that you get the form locking here. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and enter correct credentials. And you'll see as soon as I log in, it creates the token and the user object, and it saves it here in the browser. And here is our JSON object in the form of a user, and that's what we did with json.stringify. Okay, so it basically just saves that data here in the browser, and then we can access it anytime we need to. So I'm actually going to go ahead and generate another component for the profile page. So let me go ahead and go into client, source, app, and components. And then I'll go ahead and add that to my my routes. Oops. Same thing, go back to here, the navigation, and I'm just going to change that. Okay, so then on this profile page, I'm going to create a little, just a sample profile so that we can retrieve the user's data. So going into that component profile, just change this up really quick. Okay, and so this is what the profile page is going to look like. And then what we're going to do is when the user logs in, we're going to display this data. So going back to the authentication route, I need to create a new one to get the profile data. So I'll just name it profile. Same as always, I'm just going to test it. Okay, now we need a way to figure out which user is logged in, right? And the way we do that is using this token that we stored in the browser. And so what we need to do two things. One, we need to intercept tokens, and then we need to send the token within Angular too. Okay, so this is what that looks like, right? First, going to Angular inside of Authentication Service. We're going to create a new one that says get profile. And so we're going to run this function in the profile component. And what we need to do is pass in this token to that request so that when it gets to the route here, it can grab that token, decrypt it, see who that user is, and then return with the profile data. And we need to do this in an ideal way so that we don't constantly have to send the token every time and add a lot of configuration. So we can use headers for that. Okay, so going back to Authentication Service. If you recall, when I imported this here, I also imported headers and request options, so we can go ahead and use that now. And so just right here, I'm going to create another function called create authentication headers. And so what we'll do is we'll use this function anytime that we need to attach headers. All right, and headers will be needed anytime that the user has to be authorized or authenticated before they access something. So for example, a profile page, they need to be authenticated before they can access that. Let's say you have an admin area and you want the user to be authenticated first. We'll invoke this function anytime those types of routes are accessed. Below this, I'm going to create a function called load token, and this is going to actually grab the token from the browser from that local storage, right? Just local storage.get item, and then the item that you want to get. And so for me, it'll be token. Then I'm just going to assign this to a const named token, and then I'm going to set this, which we created up here, to that token. So now within this function, I'm going to actually call that function. So now we can go ahead and create our headers. And to do that, you just type in this.options, and go ahead and create that up here. Okay, and that's what we'll use. And I'm going to say new request options. It's going to have our headers. Then the content type is going to be JSON. Then we're going to name it authorization. And then we're going to attach that token there. Okay, so now we'll call this function for every service here that we need in order to attach the headers. Okay, so for example, for this get profile, we need to do that. So I'll just call that here. And so once we create those headers, then this options here becomes available. So this is what it's going to look like, right? It's going to be really similar to what we were doing before, but we're going to actually pass in something additional. All right. So we'll return this dot http.get. And then here's where we pass in these options, or this options. Then go ahead and map that. Okay, so now we can use this inside of our profile component. So opening up the component file, we need to go ahead and import the service first, the authentication service. And so what I'll do is I'll pass it here in ng on init. And so what that does is on when this component's initialized, when the profile component loads, it's going to run the function to get the profile. Okay, we'll do that with this.authService.getProfile, and then subscribe to that. And you can name it data or profile, whatever you want, doesn't matter. And then I'm actually going to create up here the user. All right, and so that takes the user that we're getting returned and assigns it so that we can use it on the profile HTML page. So now here, what we can do, we can add the curly braces and add user.username, as well as user.email. Now this isn't going to work yet because even though we have a way now to send headers to this route. Going back to the route, there has to be a way on here in Express to actually intercept those headers, and we can do that with a middleware, right? And middlewares are created with .use. So we'll create a middleware to basically grab those tokens, or I mean those headers. Okay, grab the token from the header. So for the middleware, you want to pass in request, response, and then next. Actually, that's supposed to be in parentheses. So this is what the headers looks like when it comes in to Express. And normally there's a few ways to do it, but the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to pass in the name of the actual header. Now if you go back into the Authentication Service where we create them, you'll remember here I specified that the name is authorization. You can name this whatever you want, but I'm just going to use authorization. So then I'm just going to paste that exact thing right here. So now whenever any requests come in from Angular 2 that have any headers attached, it's automatically going to search for that header. Now keep in mind that any routes that come after this middleware are automatically going to run this middleware. And so what we're going to do is any routes that require authorization will go after this. And any that don't require to be authenticated will go before it. So say like the register page would go before it, but then the profile would go after it, and so on. So I'm just going to save this to a const name token, and then I'm going to run if token is not true, then I will send an error back that says no token provided. Else, what I want to do is take that token and verify it and basically decrypt it using our secret, and to see if it's a legit token and it hasn't expired. We do that with JWT.verify. So we pass in the token followed by the secret, which is config.secret, and then we're either going to get an error if we can't connect, or we're going to get the decoded token. So of course if we get an error, then we want to return error. This usually means that the token has expired or is invalid. So we can say something like token invalid maybe, and then pass in that error as well. Else, this means that the token has passed verification and it is a valid token. So we can just assign this to a global variable here to use. So we'll name it request.decoded, and grab that and assign it here, and then we can access it here in the profile. So I'm going to test that by getting rid of this, and instead I'm going to send back request.decoded to see what it looks like. So now you'll notice if you try to hit send to that profile route, you're going to get an error that says no token provided. So since we're not doing this from Angular, from the browser, we're not sending any headers. So we need to just manually implement the header. And so what I'll actually do is go in here and grab the one that I already have. So let me just log in and get that. Then I'll just double click this token and just copy it. So then in Postman here where it says headers, you want to just type in the name. So for us it was authorization, and then paste that in there. Then once you hit send, oh actually I forgot to add, after this you have to actually type in next. Otherwise you'll never break out of that. So okay, and then once you hit send there, you'll see you get that the request.decoded, right, which is the token with the time it was created, the time it expires, and then the ID, which is the only thing that I encrypted into the token. Okay, so now we can use this to get more information on the user. So I'll just say user.find1, I'm going to search by ID, and I'm going to use this user ID here. I don't want to grab the entire user object, so I'm just going to specify what I want to select. And I only want the username and the email. I don't want password and all that stuff. And then I'll either get an error or a user. Same thing as before. And so if I do get success, actually I'm not even going to send a message, I'll just send the user back. So I'll go ahead and test that really quick, hit send. Now you may get this error here where it says token invalid, JSON Web Token error, invalid signature. Because of the way that we have this set up, what we actually have to do is get another one from here. But once we send it up to front end, we won't have to keep doing this. So I'm just going to log in again. Oops. And then grab this token again. And once you hit send, you should get that success there. And then here is the user object that we're sending back to the front end to be used. So now we're done with Postman, and we can go ahead and move back over to the profile component. Okay, so we already have this set up to assign it to this variable. So I'm actually going to change this up a bit. Instead of what I'm going to do, instead of having the user, I'll just have username and then email, like that. And then I'll just set it here. So I'll say username equals profile.user.username, and then email equals profile.user.email. And then back over in the HTML, I'll just change this to say username and email. So once you hit save on that, go back over to the profile page, and then you should see that here. Now, if you don't see it here on the profile page, you may need to go and log in again to get that token saved in the storage in order for that to work. Okay, so now we need a method of logging out. So I'll just create that really quick. Back over in the auth services, down at the bottom, under login, I'll create one called logout. And this is going to be pretty simple. We'll take the token and just set it to null, and then the user, set that to null, and then clear the local storage. And so back in the nav bar, I'm going to add to this logout, I'm just going to add a click event, so I'm going to get rid of that. And so when users click the logout, I'm going to create a function here called onLogoutClick. Just copy that. And then in the navbar component, I'm going to go ahead and create that. I also need to import the service. Okay, so now I can run that. And I'm also going to import the router. And that's so that I can navigate to the home page after logout. And I'm going to import one other thing, and This is something called Flash Messages Service. And then we'll need to install this as well. And basically what this is for is to display messages on the fly without them being static to the page. So since logout doesn't have its own view, this is good for that. So you just search Angular 2 Flash Messages. Then all we need to do is just install this right here. And then we also need to import the Flash Messages module in our main file. We'll go back over to the root. And this one actually has to be inside of the Angular 2 folder, so inside of client. I'll just paste that in there. And then go back over to my main app.module file inside of the imports. If you'll remember that from right here, it just says use this, and I'll just copy it actually. And then you also have to import it here at the top. I'm going to show you really quick how this works. So underneath logout here, actually I need to also pass it in the constructor. So I'll say Flash Messages Service. I'll say this dot Flash Messages Service dot show message, and I'll just say you are logged out. And then after this quotation, I'll pass in a property for the CSS class, and I'll use Bootstrap's alert info. Now to display this Flash message, we need to include it in our main file here. Let's see where we're at. The app component.html. And you can do that just above the router or above the views. So you just use Flash Messages. Okay, so now if you go log in, and then once you hit that logout, you'll see the message up here, okay? And it redirects to the home page. Now there are a few other options. You can configure this with a timer and a few other cool things, but that's just basic usage right there. Okay, so then last, what we need is a way to know if the user's logged in. That way we can hide some of these things in the navigation menu. Okay, so going back to our nav bar, if you open up to HTML, right now these links are available at all times. We don't want to display them, say for example login, if the user is already logged in. So there's actually a really easy way to do this, and the way if you just search Angular 2-JWT Json Web Token, there's a really easy method that you can use. And so the method is called token not expired. So this is all you need to do. You can actually just copy this exact thing and it will work really easy for you. So let me just paste this here. Okay, and then before it'll work, you'll actually just need to install inside the Angular 2 folder that module. Don't forget the -save. And so behind the scenes, that's just checking your token and making sure that it's a valid token, that it's not expired. So now we can use this inside of our navigation. So we'll just work our way from the top here. We want home to display it at all times. And actually this should be just a slash, not /home. And then for this dashboard, we only want this if the user is logged in. So I'll add an ngIf here to the list element, the list tag here. So I'll say ngIf if auth service, service, should be a lowercase. And then that new function we just created, which is logged in. So, and that's this one, the bottom. So this is going to grab that token and see if it's expired, and if not, it lets us know that the user is logged in. So if it returns false, and that's what this is, then we're going to hide this. And actually this That's if it's true, that's when we want to show it. And you want to save that and just go back, and if you're logged out, if you're not, go ahead and log out. But if you're not, then dashboard should vanish there. And then once you log back in, you'll notice dashboard immediately pops up there again. And then once you log out, same thing. So let's go ahead and continue on to profile. We'll do the exact same thing. Same thing with blog. And login we'll do not true. And then register we'll do, of course, the opposite. And let me just verify I made, and I did these all correct. So you should have just those two up right now. And once you log in, you get these up here. Okay. Now I do realize that if you type in like say /dashboard after you log in, it still takes you to the route. Now there's a way, easy way to restrict these routes so that way the user can't just manually go to them. But I'm going to address that in the next video because I don't want this video to run too long. But yeah, just stay tuned to the next video if you want to find out how to do that.